Welcome to Rainier View. My name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here, and we're continuing in this series, What If Jesus Was Serious? We're looking at Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. We're going through this all summer long because Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount is some of the most influential, impactful teachings that ever has been recorded, literally impacting billions of people over thousands of years. And yet we can struggle with understanding, how do I apply these teachings to my life? A little bit of a PSA up top. We are talking about sex and marriage and Jesus' words towards that and what it means for us today. If you have younger ears, elementary age kiddos, we're going to be talking about some adult concepts and adult words. And so you might want to make some choices about where you are listening to this service or this message right now. And so, but we're going to jump into that. And so we want to start by just picking up in Matthew 5, beginning in verse 27. And as we get into it in a moment, you might be surprised and challenged by Jesus' words here. Surprised at how direct he is and how much this speaks directly to issues that we all struggle with and face. And you might find it extremely challenging to some of the beliefs that you hold. Would you please just stick with it? Give this teaching a fresh look and just ask the question of this passage, what if Jesus was serious? And so if you have some questions at the end, please reach out, please message to us. We would love to help unpack that. But look with me, Matthew 5, beginning verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So as I said up top, there is some challenging teaching here in Jesus' words. Now, I want to speak right away to what Jesus does not mean. Okay? Do not gouge out an eyeball or chop off a hand. Jesus is clearly speaking with hyperbole, and we'll get to how to interpret Jesus' words in a sane manner in a little bit. But secondly, I want to point out that this issue around lust, especially as it interacts with sex and marriage, this is not a male problem only. Okay? The principles around this affect both men and women in their romantic and marriage relationships. There are some unique challenges for both men and women, typically speaking, but the principles that we're looking at speak to and apply to both of us. Now, maybe your question is, why does Jesus reserve such harsh words for the problem of lust? Is it really that big of a problem? Is that really that big of an issue? And I believe he does because lust really interferes with, disrupts, and destroys the starting point that the intention of marriage is for, to create a relationship of extreme and ultimate intimacy and trust within that marriage commitment. And lust attacks it. Lust steals, it kills, it destroys the intimacy and trust that is intended to be enjoyed by two people within the context of the marriage relationship. And so that's why Jesus' words are so harsh here, are so extreme in their language. Because the original starting point, we got to go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, God's original intention for a relationship between a man and a woman within marriage. And so what is that intimacy? What is that trust supposed to look like? Look with me in Genesis 2. Let's read about it there. We see the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame." And so you could see in the language described in Genesis 2, really this picture behind the words there, that there's an intention of a relationship to be enjoyed of extreme and pure intimacy and connection. There's nothing between the man and the woman in their relationship before sin enters the picture. And Jesus affirms that this is still the purpose, this is still the intent, the goal of the marriage relationship. This intimacy, this trust that the Bible describes there as one flesh, Jesus reiterates and reaffirms in Matthew 19. Look at that passage with me now. Beginning in verse 3, I read this passage often when I officiate weddings. It says, some Pharisees came to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Haven't you read, he replied, that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus makes it clear that this is still the expectation, this is still the deal, this is still God's goal for us as men and women to enjoy. We actually recorded a whole podcast to dive into the background of that comment of, is it legal or not for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? And you can catch that on our RVCC podcast. But the question I want to look at here out of this passage that we just read in Matthew 19 is really asking, why is this the case? Why is can't we just move on from a person? Hey, try to be with this person, it's not working out, just I'm going to try it with somebody else. Why is God so fixated, it seems in the Bible, on this lifelong commitment of marriage? Well, he's made it clear that lust is the enemy of that commitment. That lust comes in, and when it does, it steals, it kills, and destroys the intimacy and the trust that is intended to be built, not over 6 months, not over a year, not over 10 years, but over a lifetime with someone else. There's no substitute and shortcut for that lifelong commitment, for those things to take root deeply in the life of a couple. I have a book on my bookshelf called Intimate Allies by Dan Allender and Tremper Longman. And I think it's really a great descriptor of what biblical marriage is supposed to be. Intimate allies. Because if you could have a person in whom you could find total acceptance, total trust, total unity with, and spend the rest of your life getting to know them in a more deeper level, better and better, each and every day, each and every year, wouldn't you sign up for that? Well, this is the biblical picture of marriage that we're presented with. It's the goal. And part of it is, as we experience that with another person within the context of marriage, it's a picture, it's a glimpse of what one day the trust and the intimacy of a relationship that we will enjoy with God. That we enjoy in a limited way, in part now, but one day there's much fuller reality. This is the picture that marriage gives us. And so it's why lust is such a big deal, because it robs you and others of that trust, of that intimacy. And so we clearly see, even from the beginning, back to the Old Testament, in the Ten Commandments, that this wasn't the expectation for God's people, their code of conduct. This is not how you are to live. Look with me kind of there in Exodus 20. Picking up in verse 14, we read one of the commandments, very straightforward, you shall not commit adultery. But then the final command on that list has to do with coveting. Look with me. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, or his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And so for God's people to walk in God's ways, we are not to covet, meaning we are not to mentally lust after something that isn't ours. When we make a choice to grasp at another mentally in a sexual manner, we're coveting, we're taking hold of that. It's why sexual abuse is such a horrific act, because we're robbing another individual of that intimacy and trust with another against their will. Okay? And so we see this concept of coveting mentally clearly is already preceding Jesus' words here. He's just building upon it. He's kind of saying, hey, in the way of life that I'm inviting you into, this is coming into sharper focus here. Look with me back in the Sermon on the Mount passage, Matthew 5, verse 28. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And so when we, male or female, engage in mentally taking another for our own sexual fantasy and enjoyment, that is what God said thousands of years prior that we ought not to do, to be coveting, to desire something that is not ours. Stealing mentally away from someone else. Now you might say, but what is the harm? Is anybody really hurt? It's not like anything is happening in real life. Okay? But the reality is we are robbing ourselves or our marriage partner, if we're married, from intimacy when we choose to give into lust. And you might say, okay, but what if I'm not married? Well, really, the only difference is time in. The only difference is we're robbing somebody of a future trust and intimacy that they've yet been able to enjoy. It destroys the work that God intends for us to build into of becoming more fully known by another. And so think about this. Pornography in our society, in our world today, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. I was just reading an article that said the website Pornhub is the 13th most profitable website on the internet, okay? So lust leads people to engage in sexual activity outside the context of marriage, to feed the lust of other people that they will never know. We see what the world has created is taken this good gift of sex, but the way that we engage with it, the way we use it, robs others of the intimacy and trust that God desires for us to build a life with somebody else. This is why lust is such a problem, is why it's such a big deal to Jesus. And here's the reality. Because of the access of smartphones and internet-enabled everything, like you got internet-enabled ice makers on your fridge now, okay? Because of that, you and I just can't simply stay away from sexually explicit material or pornography. It seeks us out now. The last time I looked at the stats, it was around the age of 12 was the average age of exposure to sexually explicit or pornographic material online for children. I have to believe that with the access to the internet being so ubiquitous that age is actually much, much lower now. And so, again, pair that with the reality that the majority of men and a significant portion of women in our society regularly view pornographic material online. Right? We've got a big problem to deal with. It means that we have to be proactive if we're going to guard against the power of lust to, again, steal, kill, and destroy the intimacy and trust that God desires for us to enjoy with our marriage partner. And so, quick kind of step, what's one thing you can do? Make sure that all of your devices, tablets, smartphones, that little mini TV on your ice maker on your fridge, okay, whatever it is, make sure that all of those settings are set to limit explicit adult content, or however they tag that. All of them have a setting to automatically guard and gatekeep against that. Now, you might still seek it out, but at least put some measures in to keep it from seeking you out, or keeping a lot of it from seeking you out. Now, also, parents, when you're in that situation where you discover that your children have viewed sexually explicit material online, don't freak out, because remember, it's seeking us out. Have a conversation that's based around solutions. It's based around mutual trust and respect. It's based around your desire as a parent to help your children in the future have that kind of relationship with somebody else that's marked by a deep intimacy and trust and fulfillment that's worth guarding against. Again, help them understand this God-honoring path to walk, but don't give into the temptation to react out of fear or shame or freak out. But again, assess what's happened, put some boundaries in place, help your kids see the big picture. Because we need to remember that there is grace and redemption, regardless of how big of a mess we might have made in our lives, how much we might feel our ability to experience intimacy and trust with another has been damaged by the free rein that maybe we've given to lust in our life, but none of us are beyond the redemption of God. God's grace is so deep, His love is so powerful that we can be restored. Now, yes, there are consequences. There is loss when lust wins out. And so that's why we want to be as proactive as possible to fighting against it, to guarding against it. And that's why Jesus has such serious words for us around lust. Look back with me in the passage, picking up Matthew 5, verse 29. If your right eye causes you to stumble, Gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, as I said at the beginning, at the outset, Jesus does not want you cutting off body parts. Okay? Do not make the mistake that the 2nd, 3rd century church father Origen made by reading this passage, and then he decided that his application step was to castrate himself. Okay? That's not the application that we want you to take away from this passage, because think about the metaphor here. You and I are just as equally capable of lusting with one eye as we are with two. You and I are just as equally as capable of giving in to lust's power to steal, kill, and destroy in our lives with one hand as we are with two. And so in the 1st century, those original hearers, they would have understood this phrase to mean your right hand, your right eye was your strong eye, your strong hand. And so what Jesus is really communicating, he's saying, hey, if anything risks robbing you of that strength, to remain single-focused, okay? And in this case, what does single-focused mean? Single-focused on committing to a marriage relationship, current or future, that is marked by deep intimacy and trust with another. He says, do whatever it takes to cut out of your life something that's going to rob you of the strength to do that. That's what Jesus is really communicating and intending for us, to take radical action to protect that intimacy and trust that lust desires to steal from us. Let me share one practical example from my own life, how I have done this. This isn't say, like I'm so great, I just want to give us a real practical life example of this. So I try to the best of my ability to avoid movies that have sexually explicit material, nudity, and I either try not to watch them. If I'm watching something that's unexpected, I try and skip over that, or worst case, I go out of the room until it's done. And so I've had to say no. I've had to cut off some things that honestly I probably would like to enjoy. For example, I made a conscious choice not to watch the Game of Thrones series after hearing about a lot of the sexually explicit content within that series. And I had people tell me, oh, you'll love it so much. You love that kind of world, that kind of genre. Oh, you gotta watch it. But I just said, look, I'm not going to. It's not something for me. Now, do I love that type of fantasy genre? Absolutely. Did I miss out on a cultural phenomenon? Yes. Would 100 times out of 100 would I choose to do what I need to do to protect the intimacy and trust in my marriage and not give that away, even accidentally giving lust that foothold to steal and kill and destroy, even a small level? Absolutely, I would choose to protect that 100 times out of 100. Now, I know some of you are like, you're a grown man. That's ridiculous. And others of you are saying, whoa, time out. I thought that following the way Jesus was not about like a list of do's and don'ts. It's not about a rule sheet to follow. And so how do you make that decision, okay? It is true that the goal of the Christian life, following in the way of Jesus, is not to curate a list of these are the things that you can do, these are the things that you can't do. But instead, it is about doing the work to discern this. Will something take me further away from the kingdom of God type of life that Jesus sacrificed himself for me to experience? If anything's going to take me further away from that, I'm going to take radical action to cut it out, to be committed to that way of life. Because how can I honor the sacrifice that Jesus has made for me by taking him seriously on what he expects me to do? That's really the question that you and I need to ask. And honestly, it's a lot more demanding than just keeping a list of like, you can watch this, you can watch that, you can listen to this, you can't listen to that kind of thing. Sometimes you need to take that radical action to protect the intimacy and trust that God desires for you to enjoy. Again, otherwise, we end up damaging and hurting not only ourselves, but the other people in our lives. Think about the fact that we've made it so easy with modern technology to create all these apps that you can just keep swiping and make it super easy to hook up with somebody sexually that you don't really know or intend to even stay with. But also, conversely, it's left people feeling emptier, more cynical than ever before in their ability to find somebody to commit to for the rest of their life, and even sometimes thinking it's not worth it or I'm just not able to experience that. Okay, we've got to make this connection. Now, the problem, I think, when it comes to a passage like this that we've been in Matthew 5, I think there's broad agreement. Nobody's really pushing back against this ideal of enjoying a relationship over decades of our life marked by deep intimacy and trust with another. Nobody's saying, I don't want that, right? The problem that we have is that we struggle with knowing how to protect that, how to pursue and find that relationship with somebody else. And so there are probably some very specific problems that you are wrestling through trying to figure this out in your own life right now. For instance, what do you do if you're single, but the entire world around you and all your peers are acting in a contrary manner to abstaining from sexual activity until marriage? What do you do when you're living that out in real time? Maybe you're asking the question, how am I supposed to navigate a painful divorce that I didn't sign up for or expect? Maybe you're asking the question, what do I do about years or even decades of viewing sexually explicit material online or pornography? Or what do you do about a spouse who's been in that cycle in their own life? And so as I wrap up this message, I'm going to try and answer some of these to the best of my ability, some of these common questions that I've seen come up again and again and again in the lives of people as I've pastored over a couple decades here. I will not be able to give you a specific turn-by-turn roadmap for what you need to do. But what I can do is point to some time-tested wisdom, some places to begin in answering these questions in a better manner, in a different manner than the way the world around us, the culture around us, invites us to answer these. And so first, let's talk about pornography. Hopefully, I made the point clearly enough that the problem of giving full vent to our lust is that it steals, kills, and destroys against the intimacy and trust that God desires for us to experience in the marriage relationship. And in terms of answers here at Rainier View, we partner with another church locally, but it's a national program called Pure Desire, which helps both men and women process the reasons behind pornography use and addiction and understanding what's going on so that we can experience a restoration of freedom. And so if that's a place that you're in and you want to experience that kind of freedom and hope again, reach out. We will get you connected to that ministry. But you may be wondering, does pornography use, is that a reason for divorce, biblically speaking? And the answer is maybe. Similar to earlier in the series when I talked about anger doing in a limited way what murder does in a permanent way. And it's not a one-to-one analogy, but that principle remains the same. Continued pornography use, continued viewing of sexually explicit material online damages the marriage relationship in a very terrible, horrible way, but in a limited way compared to what a physical relationship with somebody else outside of our marriage would do in kind of a permanent way. And so the degree to which pornography use has destroyed that intimacy and trust in marriage, it can lead to the very same state of what Jesus describes, that marriage covenant, that's the biblical word for the marriage commitment, being broken, being destroyed. Now, I can't answer for you this question. Is ongoing pornography use within a marriage as bad as physically having a relationship sexually with somebody else? I can't answer that question for you. For some couples, that long-term and ongoing use of pornography is just as bad and is equated with adultery. For other couples, there's a huge Grand Canyon-sized difference between viewing pornographic material online and cheating with somebody else physically in real life. And so I can't answer that question for you in your marriage. But even if lust doesn't lead to a physical relationship with somebody outside of our marriage, continued long-term use of pornography, giving in to our lust and giving it full reign, can lead to these conditions that are very close, if not the same, as the marriage relationship being broken the way that adultery functions. Now, my encouragement, my wisdom to any couple in either of these cases is to use every possible means, every possible tool that God gives you in your life to restore your relationship, to work on it, to try and make it work. Exhaust every possibility, even in the greatest breaches of trust. Now, speaking of sexual immorality and adultery within marriage, does infidelity mean that you have to get a divorce? That the relationship is permanently broken forever? And the answer to that biblically is no. It doesn't mean that road back to restoring a relationship that's been affected by infidelity is not extremely difficult, but divorce isn't the only and necessary answer that comes out of that. Again, Jesus makes it clear that relationship has been broken and destroyed. But if both parties are willing to work at the relationship, restoring it, out of the ashes of that pain and hurt, seeing it rebuilt, that is a good, honoring path to pursue. Because both in Genesis 2 that we looked at earlier, that commitment of one flesh together, and Matthew 19, Jesus reiterating that, the goal is to do everything possible to hold tightly, to invest in that lifelong commitment to one another. Now, that might not be possible for us. Our marriage might have ended in divorce. And for those of us who have gone through that or know others, we shouldn't view people in that situation as second class or somehow they failed, okay? Just because reconciliation didn't happen or wasn't possible. But sometimes we do write off a situation, I believe in our culture especially, far too quickly, and we leave out the possibility of God being able to heal and restore that relationship. So I was counseling a couple once, and the husband was going through a difficult time with his wife, and she had kind of communicated to him she was ready for this to be done. She wanted it to be over. It appeared to be maybe she was pursuing relationships with other men. It wasn't clear whether or not that had taken place yet, but it had seemed over. In my mind, it said, look, you have done everything you can to try and make this work, but she's asking to put this to an end. I think that you've gone over and above. But then over this course of a year almost, something interesting happened. That God began to work. That she decided, I need to start going back to church. She started going back to church, and she said, I'm open to getting couples counseling now. And all of a sudden, God begins to knit together what doesn't look like possible from the outside, what doesn't look possible from the world's point of view. God begins to restore and heal. Now, that might not be your story. That might not be the likely outcome of anyone's story in a difficult situation. But here's the lesson that I took away from this, and I want you to take away as well. That don't close the door on God being able to change and work on someone else's heart and mind. Don't close the door on that. Leave that door open as long as possible. Now, another question around divorce that gets brought up and asked when we kind of look at passages like this is the question, is physical adultery the only biblical justifiable reason for divorce? And at minimum, I would say that spousal abuse, while not named here clearly by Jesus in this passage, I would personally qualify as a complete breakdown, a complete breaking of that marriage covenant, okay, that marriage commitment. And if I'm wrong and I get to heaven, I'll take the L on that one, okay? But here's the deal that I made with God a long time ago, and he hasn't deemed to change my mind on it, that I would personally not be on the hook. I would never encourage a woman to stay in a situation that she would continue to experience abuse, that she would continue to have her physical well-being threatened in any way, shape, or form, or the well-being of her children. Okay? If there's physical abuse going on, there's no biblical justification. As I've read the Bible again and again over the years, both in the Old Testament and the New, I cannot see God saying, this is what I want for you to experience. This is a situation that I want you to remain in. And so if you've got questions about that, we'd love to, again, message around that. But the reality is, the goal biblically is to do whatever we can do to always fight for that lifelong commitment. Even when the intimacy and trust has been rocked to its core, it seems impossible. We trust God to do that very thing, the impossible. But when there's a time when one partner has made it very clear that they want to go and they're out, sometimes that's the road that we have to walk. And then we step into a next chapter of life where God's grace can meet us there and help heal the deep wounds and hurts that have happened, okay? And I can't tell you when that line is for you. Like, when do you honor that decision by somebody else? Is it when they've just said, I'm out? Is that when it's biblically justifiable to split? Is it when they're entering into a romantic relationship with another person, regardless of whether or not sexual activity has occurred? I don't know where that line is for you, but this is why it's so important to be in a church community, to have other people around that you can connect with and say, hey, how would you counsel me to navigate this? There are other people that have walked through similar painful situations and have learned some things and can be there to help you discern the path of what it looks like for you to honor Jesus with your life in that. And so as we close, I want to pray for 4 groups of us, because I know that this issue of what lust does and how powerfully it steals and kills and destroys the intimacy and trust that God wants for a marriage relationship, there's 4 groups of us that I want to pray for, okay? The first one is I want to pray for those of you who've kind of given up on your marriage. You felt like it's done. You might not have signed papers yet, but you've given up. And I want to pray for you in a moment that God would spark some hope in your life right now, that he would give you the next step that you can take to move to restoring that relationship that maybe has suffered a loss of trust and intimacy, and that God could revive that. Secondly, I want to pray for those of you who are carrying those hidden wounds of guilt and shame around a marriage that did fail, around a divorce, and that maybe there's some things that you've been holding on to and you've never grieved those fully or properly. I want to pray for you to begin to experience God's restoration, his healing, even right now, today. Third, I want to pray for those of you who are you feel like you're caught in the web of lust. You've been sucked down this rabbit hole on the internet for so long of giving in to your lust around sexual temptations. I don't know how I would even get out of this. I want to pray that for you, God would give you a clear next step and be able to repent of that and begin to turn and identify a step there. And lastly, I want to pray for those of you that are trying to wait for that marriage partner. You're trying to abstain from sexual activity until you're married, but it is incredibly difficult. Everyone around you, it feels like, is not doing that. I want to pray for you to have the strength and the courage to continue to pursue waiting on God if marriage is something that he has for you, to wait for that person to build that life of deep trust, deep intimacy with that you can enjoy for the rest of your life. So let me pray for those 4 groups of us. God, I pray for those of us that are joining today, right now, and if we're honest, we've kind of given up on our marriage being marked by intimacy and trust. Maybe there are long-standing issues, and we've kind of thrown up our hands. Maybe it's not done yet, but we don't have a lot of hope. I pray right now, God, that you are the God of hope. You would spark something anew in us. Give those of us in that situation the next right step to take to restore a level of intimacy and trust in our marriage relationship. For those of us that are holding on to these hidden wounds, the guilt that's wrapped up within us still around a failed marriage, a marriage that ended in divorce, God, would your comfort, would your peace just invade our hearts and our minds? Help those of us that are in that situation to be able to do what we need to do to grieve in order to experience God's comfort in a real and powerful way right now, and to do the things that you need to do in your life to really heal fully and to bring a close to that chapter, to live out of the fullness of what God has for you right now. Third, I pray for those who just feel completely defeated, that feel completely wrapped up in this web of lust and engaging with sexually explicit material online, or even stepping out and cheating on our marriage partner with somebody else in person. And for the individual that's joining us right now that doesn't know where to even begin, God, would you give those of us that are in that situation a heart of repentance, of saying, I'm tired of choosing me. I'm tired of the way that choosing to give in to lust makes me feel terrible and defeated, and I know it's hurting others. I want to live differently, God. And then just have the courage and the bravery to take that next step. And then lastly, I want to pray for those that are waiting, that are trying to honor you with their sexuality by waiting until marriage to engage in sexual activity, but it just seems so incredibly difficult. Everything in the world seems to be stacked against that. But I pray for those individuals joining us in that season of life. If marriage is something that you have for them, give them the strength and the courage to wait and hold on for that. To be able to experience truly a deep well of trust and intimacy with another. It's in the powerful name of Jesus that I pray. Amen. And so if you have any questions about next steps to take, or you'd like to just get some counsel from one of our pastors or a trusted leader, please reach out and message us. We would love to set up a time to connect over even just a video call with you or in person if you're local here. But we would love to help point you to the right next step to take hold of the good things that God has for you, including a better marriage relationship marked by intimacy and trust that lust will not steal, kill, or destroy. Thank you so much for joining us today.